presented by Dano's Seasoning. Yum yum, get you some.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Dominic Cressetto, the host of the Sunbelt Syndicate podcast. Welcome into our first ever video podcast where we will have a special guest, Brendan Biskobing, and he will specifically speak on some Coastal Carolina coverage. Don't forget to check out Dano's Seasoning. It's one of the fastest growing seasoning companies in America with over 6.5 million followers across social media platforms, retail offerings in over 18,000 stores. People can't get enough of that yum, yum, get me some. Just a great saying and a slogan overall. Available in all 50 states as well as any Canadian Sunbelt fans or college football fans in general. Be sure to visit danosseasoning.com and try their new flavor, Cheesy Song. I'm just destroying that. But anyway, it's a fantastic one with the cheese flavor. I'm sure you put it on fries or burger. It's going to make anything fantastic. Be sure to also use that promo code DAWGS to help out your college football Dawgs staff as we try and provide you with some of the best football coverage out there. So let's not wait any further. Brandon, welcome to the show. Where are you sitting at right now?
I'm sitting in my studio just outside of North Myrtle Beach.
Very nice.
Probably about half hour away. Depending upon traffic, it's about a half hour away from Coastal.
Nice. A hop, skip, and a jump, as they say, right? Very nice. How long have you lived down there in that area?
I've lived down here now for 9 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, but you didn't actually attend Coastal Carolina, right?
No, I did not.
Right. So we're both covering teams that we didn't attend the school for. It's awesome because that means that something's going right for these schools to have people as outsiders coming in, right?
Well, I mean, Coastal definitely proved that a couple of years ago, but a lot of it's also the fact, living in the area and whatnot. I didn't go to a football school, so, kind of just had to find my own D1 football school.
Yeah, they keep rounding themselves into a good one, right? National coverage, the COVID year really exploded for them and brought them into the scene. I mean, as an old school wrestling fan, and I know you and I both are, it's got to be fun when they were having all the after win locker room celebrations with the tables and chairs and all the.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, that was a blast. I love that. Even as a fan of another team in the same conference, I had to love that aspect of what they did.
You gotta respect both the surf turf and the mullets.
I'll respect one of them. I don't know about the surf turf. The mullets, you gotta love the mullets, man. Especially, Coastal's just playing into everything. They got that for baseball, for football. It's the new hairstyle, and it works for that crowd. It works for most of the Sun Belt, to be totally honest. They just were one of the first ones to make it cool. But let's jump right into it. I mean, big time news right at the end of the season there. I guess technically before the bowl game, Jamie Chadwell leaves the program. What are your thoughts and feelings on how that went and whatever you want to talk about with that?
Yeah, the biggest surprise to me, for a couple of years, especially after 2020, everyone around here kind of saw, okay, Jamie has run his course here at Coastal. Yes, the Sun Belt is on the rise, especially with all the additions, but it's still a group of five. A lot of us down here were thinking, okay, he's going to look to jump up to maybe a lower end Power 5. I'm not surprised he left. I am surprised, though, where he went. Yes, Liberty beat them in the I'm drawing a blank on which bowl it was in. Well, it was the last game of the season, actually. They were supposed to play in the regular season, but it wasn't the bowl. I forget what bowl it was off the top of my head in 2020. But yes, Liberty beat them, but still, I feel like that's more of a lateral move for Jamie. And, personally, I think he would have done more staying in Coastal and waiting until a bigger job opened up.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I wouldn't even consider it a lateral move so much with where Conference USA is expected to be.
That's a good point.
But the significant factor that took him away was solely based on money, which Liberty surprisingly has a ton of. Yeah. So that makes sense. I mean, you leave for the big paycheck because you never know in that coaching profession when you're going to get another one. But I absolutely agree with you. I do not see Liberty on any kind of higher pedestal than I see Coastal Carolina, at least in this current landscape. Had Liberty been invited to the ACC or something crazy, obviously that would have been a different factor there. So in comes in Tim Beck right here locally where I'm at in the Triangle from NC State. What's the early thoughts and feelings on what he could bring or what he's going to do with this program continuing forward?
Yeah, the big thing for him, especially this year, I mean, this year it's basically just, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Just keep everything as it was. They've been successful for the last couple of years. But also the fact that he is was a quarterback, is primarily a quarterback's coach. A lot of people, and he was asked this question during the press conference after one of the scrimmages. What's your focus on Grayson McCall? And he basically said just trying to get him, more prepared for the next level and just honing in on some of his skills, some of his footwork stuff and whatnot. But that's one thing that a lot of people around here are saying that's a good thing that Tim Beck is here for Grayson McCall's last season because he can help develop him even further.
Absolutely. And speaking specifically on Grayson McCall, obviously had a little flirtation with leaving the school. And I think it's not so much an indication on Coastal necessarily, but some of those scouts are going to be asking whether he can do it at a different level, right? So I don't think anyone at Coastal really should be taking offense to that. I don't really know if they did. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they understood kind of the assignment there, if you want to say it. But luckily, it worked out kind of for everybody in the end that he returns to school. I'm sure the team's happy with that. Where do you expect his play to go with what we just mentioned with Tim Beck coming in, probably with a focus on kind of further developing his game and maybe showing the scouts in the NFL what they really have and as a possibility of McCall going forward?
Yeah. The one thing, like you mentioned, obviously Tim Beck coming in is going to help his progression. But another thing, and the first day of practice, you heard this everywhere. Coaches, the SID over there, media members, everyone was saying, oh, Grayson McCall has put on some pounds and he looks bigger and better than ever. And so it's gonna be a big test this season. Like you mentioned, he obviously wants to go to the pros. This year is going to be his coming out party, so to speak, and saying to the rest of the world, hey, I am the real deal and I deserve to be at that level. And obviously the season, as the season progresses, he's going to have multiple tests, but not only for him, but for the team as a whole, for Tim Beck as a new head coach, they've got a big test and probably the ultimate litmus test for them week 1 at UCLA. If they can win that game, which I think they can, if they can win that game or even at the very least make it competitive, that will really show that this team is the real deal and that they will be a force to be reckoned with in the Sun Belt.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely agree that they've got a great shot. I think anytime you've got a talented quarterback with a good group around him, you're just going to see that with Tim Beck coming in, a little bit of an unknown, right? They don't have film on this team specifically, right? They can use last year's all they want. That was under Chadwell. This is going to be under Beck. What different wrinkles does he offer for McCall himself and also the offense as a whole? It's going to be really tough for UCLA to game plan for that, and they have no idea what's coming. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, it's not going to go in there and try and change a whole ton of things, but what he is going to try and do is bring this to a level of what they already did and just contribute to it. And so I think that's going to be very dangerous for UCLA in week 1. We'll touch back more on the season as a whole. Let's talk defensively for a second. Obviously, not too bad last year, but they did have some games where they allowed a little more points than they would have liked, right? And they lost some of those, but they do lose Josiah Stewart and Gerard Clark, both gone, the linebacker and nose tackle position. Clark out in the NFL, I believe. Brandon, maybe you know better than I do. I think is he with the Rams, maybe?
Yes, I believe you are correct.
Okay. Yeah, he was a huge factor. I remember being at the App State game in person last year, just saying, this kid is as big as he looks on film. You know, just, what was he, 6'5", 300 pounds or something? I mean, he's just a massive man. And if you didn't block him, that was a big mistake. I know there was one huge stop. He got into the backfield. Like as soon as the running back got the ball in his hands, it just tackled him for a loss. So big guys gone. I know JT Killen is back, though, and he is probably your best linebacker. What do you want to share or tell us about the defense going into this season for the Champs?
Yeah, obviously the defense was not their strength last season, and that was actually one of the questions I asked both head coach Tim Beck and Kennedy Roberts on that first day of practice, and they both just said communication. They said, if they can get more cohesive as a unit, that they will improve. So that was both of them said that was the first thing they both said was we have to get the communication better. So they're looking to improve, definitely. They brought in a couple of pieces that should be able to help out, and only time will tell. Again, like we talked about, that first game against UCLA, especially with a Pac-12 offense, we all know how big the Pac-12 is on offense. If they can even slow that Bruins offense down a little bit, that will show that they have massively improved from last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime you go all the way out west and play in a very different time zone with a travel like that, I mean, they've got two tests. They got one on the field and they got one kind of mentally there too. So definitely an interesting one. But like you said, one that I think they could definitely steal, because they've got to play a good game and they can't really be rusty in that first one, which is always tough to do. It's sometimes better to start with one of those FCS opponents first and then build into that. But sometimes, you catch a team sleeping.
I mean, that shows, I know schedules are created years in advance, but it shows that Coastal wants to be able to run with the big boys, and they're not afraid to play up to that level of competition. Yes, obviously it's a big payday for them as well, but a lot of times lower end, especially Sun Belt, we see it every year. They'll play a local FCS team at home to start off the season to kind of get their feet wet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it usually helps everybody around when you got kind of a local team that everybody would kind of bring some people to do that. But luckily for Coastal, you can have all those fans over there for UCLA, all 5 of them sitting in the stands, having a great time. That one's just for Colin when he watches this back to be pissed off about. But jumping back into the skilled positions a little bit, you do return Pinckney, who is widely considered one of the best wide receivers in the Sun Belt, along with Mobley and Brown, who really, I don't know if it's McCall making these kids look great or if they're really just that talented, but you've got a trio of wide receivers to help out McCall even further. Thoughts or feelings on the wideouts going into this season? I mean, I don't think there's really any concern, but maybe expectations or what you think. I know Pinckney did go out with an injury for a little bit from time to time last season, so maybe a durability thing, if anything. But
the same thing. The same thing goes for McCall as well, and this is something that Tim Beck preached during his press conferences as well, was saying we need to keep primarily Grayson McCall, but you can say this for Pinckney as well. We have to stay healthy, because if they can stay healthy, like you mentioned, McCall back, all the wide receivers back, half of the offense, Yeah, running backs are back. Half of the offensive line is back. So the offense is basically the same as it was last year, minus a few pieces, but they've brought in a few transfers from Power 5 schools that should be able to help with that as well. So the offense, like I said before, the offense is a type of situation where if it ain't broke, don't fix it. As long as they are able to play the way they've played over the last couple of years, the offense is going to be fine. The defense is going to be the question this season. And the defense is going to be what is going to determine how far Coastal is able to go this season.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think you're right. The offense is going to be fine, and sticking with that just a little bit, we will talk about these guys
45 seconds left.
As we see one of their better running backs in CJ Beasley with his hurdle from the Georgia Southern game last year. Obviously one of their big highlights of the season, but they also returned Reese White and Bennett. I mean, they just got, like you said, a well-rounded offense. You think that Reese White still has that number one job going into the season, though, Brandon?
It's going to be – he's probably got the number one job, but I think very much it's going to be a platoon. It's going to be, it's going to be kind of that fire and ice type thing based on situation and whatnot. You'll see him. You'll see Beasley come in every now and again. So it's going to be a platoon.
Yeah, no, I agree. You can't. It's if you think comparing directly some of the better teams here recently, App State has the kind of platoon effect too. They got one or two go-tos. I think Coastal's going to have that. Two primary guys and that third guy who's really just as dangerous, but they can't give the ball to all three or four of them all the time.
That's basically become, in the modern game, at every level, that has been how running backs have become. You don't really... I mean, with a few exceptions, obviously, you've got the, Melvin Ingrams of the world and, those types of players that just are completely dominant and are the sole backs and the sole feature backs. But a lot of times at all levels, you have that platoon setup.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like you said, you're seeing that in the NFL too, as they devalue the running back position even further. I don't know, though, because you've got in college, your quarterback should be able to run just about as good as your running back. So I don't know what they're going to plan to do with that as both games continue to evolve offensively. Seems like every year there's some kind of new wrinkle that a lot of teams are trying to put into effect there. But, let's talk about maybe a little bit more on the secondary. I don't really need real specifics here because I got something fun I want to talk about. Okay. Got Pinckney's brother back there, which is kind of a cool effect, and maybe part of the reason that Pinckney transferred into Coastal in the first place. But the biggest thing I want to talk about in the secondary is a kid named Matthew McDoom. I mean, it doesn't even matter if he makes plays. There's going to be guys that line up across the field for him and just don't want to go against the guy with the last name McDoom. So I'm just excited to see that kid running around out there and read his nameplate all the time when he's making plays and hear the announcers say it a couple times on the broadcast.
Yeah, I wish I was able to actually call some Coastal games because I would use that a lot. I'd say McDoom is living up to his namesake when he made a big hit.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to hear it, man. I just love when they have fun with those names, and that one immediately sticks out for all the right reasons. So we've talked a little bit about the opening game for next season. Touching back on last year a little bit, they had that really crazy slip up really against Old Dominion, which is 49-21. Really nobody saw that coming. It was probably just one of those games where the matchups just worked out the way they did. And then again, really didn't lose any other ones until McCall was banged up after that App State game, in which they dropped, obviously their final three, as we've mentioned, got really beat up at James Madison, which it was still close in the first half. So that end score was a little surprising. Went down to Troy pretty badly in the championship game with McCall kind of going, halfway, I think, before they really realized that wasn't going to happen. And then East Carolina just got totally out of hand. But we round into this season going in with UCLA. And then after that, they got some chances to recoup. So more of an overall outlook on the season. What are your thoughts on some of their matchups? Week 2, they got Jacksonville State followed by Duquesne. I mean,
Yeah.
two softballs after you go against UCLA out west.
Yeah, those two games obviously are going to be kind of essentially just gimme games. Get some reps, get ready for the Sun Belt season. Obviously, UCLA the week 1 game is going to be the big one that is going to set the tone for the season, and then you got Jacksonville State and Duquesne that you can just not really coast, but it's not. You don't have to you don't have to worry as much about a tough opponent. And they're both at home as well, so it helps there. And then you're right into Sunbelt season. And so
3 straight road games, though.
Yeah, which is going to be tough. I mean, the toughest game, in my opinion, in the Sunbelt schedule, though, is when they travel to you and Boone and have to face App State.
I'd agree. I think overall they've got a very favorable schedule, really.
Because they don't have to play Troy.
Correct, exactly.
They don't.
South Alabama.
You were about to say it. They don't have to play South Alabama either. They don't have to play the top level of the Western Division.
Nope. And
I'm trying to even
James
remember
Madison.
who their Western opponents are this season.
It's Arkansas State and Texas State, so they really lucked out.
So
with the
very bottom of the barrel Western opponents.
Although I will say, if I'm taking not a sleeper team to end up at the top or anything, but a team that no one's expecting much from, Texas State's that team. And I just tell you, when they brought in Kenny as the coach there, and I don't know, I think he's going to run that program right. I think it's going to take some time. I don't think it's going to obviously be a contender right out of the gate or anything, but that could be a little bit closer of a game than expected. But in the plus side for Coastal, that one's at home, as is the last game of the year against James Madison, which should also be another tough one. And
that's going to be a tough one, but like you said right there, it's at home. So I think that, at least for me, that has to give the edge a little bit to Coastal. Yeah.
I would say right now, with what JMU lost, what you guys have kept around, and who you've added in the head coaching position, I think that's very dangerous. Obviously, a lot can change between now and then with injuries and such, but that's a game everyone will be having their eyes on. No, obviously, last year's game with Georgia Southern had that highlight hurdle that we just saw, and really kind of developing a small rivalry with them, I think. I think I know the answer to this, but who Coastal fans much consider their biggest rival on the field?
I would say App State.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would
definitely say App State is the big rival. But like you mentioned, and especially depending upon how the game this year goes, especially since it's at Georgia Southern, if that's a tough game, if that's a close game, if it's a nail-biter, that rivalry is definitely building.
Yeah, was it a couple of years ago, I think before the COVID year, maybe it was the COVID year, but they had that weird dance-off on either side of the
I think that was the COVID year.
I was like, okay, maybe we got something here. He's two teams who you seemingly don't really have anything in common as far as what they would be rivals for. What reason would they be rivals for? But it might have started right there and right then. Yeah,
well, that's the weird thing, and App State kind of has the same situation where a lot of the schools in the Sun Belt do have at least one natural rival based on geography. Obviously, you've got Georgia State and Georgia Southern. You've got James Madison and Old Dominion. You've got Troy and South Alabama, the two Louisianas. I feel like Southern Miss has someone, but I'm drawing a blank.
Well, Southern Miss seems to be drawing in Louisiana pretty strongly
Oh,
all of
okay.
a sudden. Southern
But
Miss is,
Southern Miss is another one that geographically doesn't really. They're kind of left out on an island as well.
yeah. I to me, even though we got the Louisiana's teams matching up, really think it makes more sense to pair, at least right now, because of how they are in multiple sports. Makes more sense to pair Southern Miss and Louisiana as those head-to-head competitors. Maybe put like ULM versus Texas State because those two really are more the real outliers.
Yeah,
With
exactly.
less
They're the
fan base.
outliers of the West, while
Yeah.
Coastal and App State are the outliers of the East.
Yeah. Well, Marshall's kind of up there too, but
That's true.
that luckily for them and App State, they kind of had this old school rivalry that was really heated back in the day. So both schools love the fact that they're back in with each other. And then the Virginia schools might be kind of triangulating there with all those to kind of loop them in. Since
we're on the subject, let me flip it on to you. Let me ask you a question, and I'll give my thoughts as well. What are your thoughts on the Sun Belt expanding? Obviously, conference realignment is going crazy again.
Yep.
Should they try to bring a few more FCS schools back up, or should they try to go after some more Conference USA teams, or maybe even a school? I don't know whether they would or not, but even a school like in East Carolina?
I would personally love to see East Carolina in, obviously as an App State guy, in that cross-state thing. I think East Carolina fits with Coastal very well as well because they're both kind of like those beach teams. They're close to the coast, but also is, the baseball aspect of that rivalry would be huge, and it would play right into football. I don't think there would take any time for those two fan bases. Pretty easy travel between the two. Wilmington's kind of in between, has a nice little stop or place to stay too. I think ECU is like a natural fit. They hate the idea, right? And to a point, you kind of understand that. Like they wouldn't mind playing some of us sometimes. I just don't think that they love the idea of a full-time membership. But
I think the problem that the Sun Belt has to fight against, especially for teams like an ECU that has a bit of a more historical prestige, if you will, is that the Sun Belt for so long, up until this latest run of realignment, was always seen as the bottom conference of FBS.
Yep. And I think luckily that just within the last year or two, it actually probably started real specifically during the COVID year when Coastal just showed what they were. And then it's just continued to build down on that with, App hosting game day last year and having the big upsets, as well as Georgia Southern going over there to Nebraska, beating them, Marshall obviously taking care of Notre Dame. These types of things are the points that people can point to and say, this is why should be considered the best G5 out there. So I think that's helping. I definitely don't think East Carolina people are laughing hysterically like you would have a year or two ago when you told them you should join the Sun Belt. But that's them. That's my first pick out for the East and my first pick out West. And this is on a totally unrelated to football aspect, but it would be cool. Arkansas State's still kind of out there on their island and don't have a ton of excitement because they don't really have any close geographical rivals anymore. I think Memphis pairing up with them, it's like an hour and a half or something at most between the two cities. And then you bring in a strong, powerful basketball program to pair with a quality football program. I'm not really positive on how their baseball team is, but I'm pretty sure they have one.
I'm pretty sure they do as well.
Okay, so that you're bringing in a team for each revenue generating sport. Although I guess baseball's a toss up whether it's really revenue generating or not. But to me, that makes
the third highest revenue sport, I would assume.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, with how much coverage they give it, I would assume it's got some kind of revenue coming in, but maybe covering costs for most of these schools. But yeah, I just think those are my first two picks. Those would be the tough two picks, though, because like I said, they're positioned in the AAC right now to make more money than they would if they came to the Sun Belt. Obviously, if they got out of that situation, more conference realignment ahead of them, they make moves because they get told that once that contract's done, they're not going to be making as much in the new one. Sunbelt's probably going to make more. That's the kind of thing that's going to entice them. So Sunbelt's really got to do their homework up front until get these contracts to where they want to be and be able to present that information going in instead of hoping for the best by inviting them and just taking a whim on whether they're going to be accepted or not. But I think the easier thing would be for them to pull up more FCS teams. If I'm being honest, I just don't want to see it because I think right now with what you've just talked about with where these conferences and these power programs are going, it's all going to these super conferences, these powerful conferences where every week's a big matchup. Every week's kind of like a rivalry almost. And the Sun Belt does not want to bring in a bunch of teams that has to develop all of that with. Yeah. I think, like I said, with Memphis and East Carolina, possibly, you're bringing in teams that people know, identify with, and want to be pissed off at, immediately. So, and I really think they need a strong basketball program. I don't know how many of the viewers out here are going to also watch some Sun Belt basketball. I know they're definitely not thought of in basketball as they are in football. But Memphis would help that tremendously, right? So the downside for Memphis basketball is they wouldn't be excited to come into the league. At the same time, though, they'd be the easy number one favorite to win it the very first year they're there. So those would be my two wish list teams right off the bat. But UAB's down there too. They're a geographical one that makes a lot of sense. Tulane's down there, but they're a small private institution. They have tons of money. I just don't think they fit the Sun Belt's thought process. And I know Hunter really wants Delaware in there. I think football wise, they'd fit pretty well as far as on the field goes. I think they'd be able to compete pretty quick. They got enough money to do it. I just don't know if they make sense when you think about the Sun Belt being kind of like that more southern region. I know we've pulled in West Virginia and Virginia, but I just don't know if Delaware is where people think. But it's like Hunter said, they're in the Mason-Dixon area, so it could still count. They're right there, and they're not far from ODU at all. So that would be another natural rival that you would have immediately right out the gate as well. But do you agree with me? Disagree with me? Who you got in the West that you'd maybe pull in?
In the West, maybe. It's kind of tricky in the West. I certainly wouldn't mind seeing like either a Tulane or a Tulsa. But again, kind of along the same lines as what we were talking about with ECU is, would they consider moving to the Sun Belt and upgrade from the American? And that's going to be the big question. Especially if, I know they don't anymore, but especially if Tulane still played in the Superdome, that would be a huge get for the Sun Belt. But unfortunately, they do not play at the Superdome anymore. But yeah, I definitely agree with Memphis. Although Memphis, it would be interesting to see how the Sun Belt universities would vote on that, because I don't know if you've ever watched the Requiem for the Big East documentary, but it would basically it would basically be the reverse of Penn State thinking about joining the Big East back in the day, because this is Sun Belt is known primarily as a football conference, and Memphis would not. They've got a football team. It's decent, but it's not the greatest. So they would definitely seemingly be maybe not downgrading, but wouldn't be upgrading on the football side. So it would be an exclusively basketball based decision, which I don't. Yeah.
You don't base decisions on basketball unless you are a only basketball school. And I think Memphis thinks enough of their football program to not just put all their eggs towards basketball, which I think they could do, right? I mean, they are very prominent in basketball, especially with their head coach there now, who's constantly getting in trouble, it seems like. But, it is what it is. But, Warhawk fans aren't going to want to hear this, but if you really, ULM's playing at mostly an FCS level as far as monetary value is concerned, and kind of being out there as an outlier. It would be interesting to see you can't really kick anybody out, right? But you bring in like 2 teams out west, like UAV and Memphis, and somehow lose somebody who decides to drop back down to maybe more level playing ground. Again, I know the Warhawk fans aren't going to be a fan of that comment, but it's like a possibility, right? When you're looking to strengthen a conference, how do you do that? Well, you add good teams, but if you can subtract bad ones too, you still kind of win in that regard. But again, that's like nearly impossible because they're going to have to move on their own instead of everything else. And if they see where the Sun Belt's headed, they're just going to assume that they're going to be able to start keeping up with the Joneses because people are just going to want to compete against these programs, which is possibly also true. I mean, ULM in basketball this year came out of seemingly nowhere to compete towards the middle of the pack from starting the season off terribly. There's no reason why they can't do that in football with Bowden. And, one of the Bowdens is one of their head coaches. So kind of a crazy thing that he ended up at that school. Even had Rich Rodriguez down there for a year running his offense. So I guess nothing's out of the question, but it is an interesting time to talk about expansion. So I'm glad you brought that up more specifically. Are there any other real big games of interest? Like, does Coastal have any big interest in playing Marshall? I mean, is that kind of like not a rivalry, of course, but is that like a team that people look forward to seeing down there come in there?
I don't know if it's really just in and of itself of it being Marshall. I don't really know if people are really like going crazy over the fact that Marshall is coming into town. But so it all depends upon how well they're doing in a given season. So, if they're playing well and it's going to be a competitive game and it's going to be it's going to be a game that may determine the East or at least play a factor in the East, then yeah, of course, people are going to get excited. But just Marshall in and of itself, I don't think is yes, it has a little bit of a name value, but not to the level that people are clamoring to go see a game just because it's Marshall.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know that I would expect more Marshall fans there this year. However, because if you remember, they played in their bowl game at your place.
Yes.
So some of them have some experience there. And based on that, I think I've really not heard bad things about people that have gone down to Coastal for a game, especially when you can loop a whole beach vacation into it. So, yeah, it's a win-win there. So I'd expect there's a large contingent of Marshall fans here in the Triangle area of North Carolina, surprisingly. So they probably got a closer game venue to go to down there at Coastal than they do to drive all the way back up home as an alumni to go up to West Virginia. So I would expect to see a lot of different shades of green in the stadium for that game this year. Let's just talk about anything else you have left to talk about as far as when it comes to Coastal Carolina football going into this season, or just any other thoughts you want to share on the Sun Belt in general.
Not too much more in terms of Coastal. Well, one thing that will definitely help, obviously not this year, but coming up, I think if I remember correctly, I was told that they won't be able to break ground on it until next year at some point. So it probably won't be finished until 2025, but Coastal is getting a new indoor practice facility, which should help with both recruiting and just practicing and all of that, especially during the beginning of training camp this time of year when the weather is very erratic, shall we say, around here. It can go from sunny to storming like that. And then, oh yes, there you go.
There we go. A little better. Trying to cut out this ad over here. There we go. Yep. All right. Yeah, it's a beautiful looking building. I actually just saw a news article about that today. This one actually specifically on My Horry News, which sounds a little dirty there, man. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good play on words there. It's a nice facility, and it's not a surprise that they would need it with the weather that they're going to encounter multiple times throughout their time of practice needs. So big, huge advantage to get something like this there on campus. Is it going to be directly across the street from where the current football field is? Do you know? Is that where the location
Yeah,
is
it's going to be built where they're building a new soccer stadium elsewhere on campus, and it's going to be built where the current soccer stadium is, which is right across the street from Brooks Stadium.
Okay. Yeah, because it's all flat over there. Last time I was there, for that game, it was definitely expandable. Now I heard too, and maybe you can confirm this, is there's a plan for that road that's running behind the stadium there to not be a travelable road, mostly just for like pedestrian use in the future. Is that what you've heard there as well, or?
I haven't heard anything specifically about that. I know when I was over there for the high school jamboree last week, they had just about the entire road leading to the stadium blocked off to where I don't even know, like, unfortunately I didn't have my car, so I had to Uber, but they, like, I don't even know how cars were parking near the stadium because they had it completely blocked off.
Interesting. Well,
I don't know if that was just because it was a game day or if that does play into what you were talking about.
Yeah. And it makes sense to not do it immediately, right? And once this construction starts, though, you never know what's going to happen, and maybe they can work the flow around it. Yeah. That was the rumor that I was told by a Coastal fan while I was down there last time. So it would make sense. I do think it is a little bit weird sometimes when you watch their broadcast and see some cars traveling behind the road.
Because it's built right next to, it's not a major highway, but it's a decent sized road that's right behind the visitor side of the stadium.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the road I got yelled at all the way back to my car after we lost this past year. It was a good time. Never seen so many drunk college students leaning out the side of cars, yelling at the other team's fans. Actually, that's not true. I saw it worse when I went to Georgia Southern as an App fan, but Coastal was a very close number 2, very fast. So it was a little bit of a surprise. But you know what? I didn't have my kid with me, so I didn't really take too much offense to it. It's all in good fun there. But unless you got anything else, Brandon, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up for us tonight here on the Sunbelt Syndicate podcast. Thank you very much for coming on. Where can people follow you throughout the season for some more college football coverage overall, and obviously specifically Coastal Carolina as well?
Yeah, you can follow me obviously on College Football Dawgs. Look for my articles on there. You can follow me on Twitter at Bisco on the Air. I'm on Facebook, Brandon Biskobing. I will be having my own podcast starting maybe next week. Not 100% sure when it will start, but it will be on Tuesday nights. Nice. Just talking about college football in general. And hey, not this week, but over the next couple of weeks, there will be a few players that are getting some Division I looks and some high-rated recruits that I'll be broadcasting online for Carolina Forest football, the high school down here. So high school football starts this week. So
very nice. Well, good luck with that. Thanks for coming on the podcast tonight, and we will look forward to more quality coverage of college football through College Football Dawgs and obviously the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers as the season continues. Thanks, Brandon.
Yep.